This is one of the most trusted men in American history. His name is Walter Cronkite, and he was the anchor of the CBS News program from 1962-63 to 1981. And he was truly, in that era, the most trusted man in America. Why was that so? Well, he covered World War II, like on the ground, walking around, interviewing people and watching things like the Battle of the Bulge. And then he became a newsman and a researcher and a journalist. And even though he never finished college, he was very, very good and learned very well on his feet. And by 1962-63, he became the anchor of the CBS News. Why does that matter? Well, because in 1962, televisions used to do a 15-minute, here's some news, as just a public service, and there were no commercials. But in 1962, they said, let's go to a 30-minute show with commercials. Well, here's a problem. If you have an oil company who's advertising on the news, and the news has to say something about an oil spill, you see where the problem is. The oil company doesn't really want you to do that. So what happened as a result was we needed to tell the oil companies, the automotive companies, pharmaceutical companies, all the companies, we were going to do a balanced news show. So they passed something called the Fairness Doctrine. Comes into being 1962, almost simultaneous to the idea of having commercials on the news. To keep the commercial companies, the companies that were having commercials, of setting the agenda of the news. So all of Walter Cronkite's life, he never knew anything else. So he was very balanced. He said both sides of a story. He gave a Republican an interview. He gave a Democrat an interview. And we had real good news, not info entertainment, but news, balanced news. And in 1981, when he retired the same year as we got a president named Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States from 1981 to 1989. And Ronald Reagan was not all about regulation. He liked the free market. So Ronald Reagan became president in 1981. By the second term of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the internet was something. It was significant. Computers were significant. Personal computers were significant. And Ronald Reagan was also not for regulation. So in 1987, he got rid of the Fairness Doctrine. News no longer had to be balanced, but CBS, ABC, NBC still tried to be because they had a tradition of almost 20 years of being balanced. But the thing that changed the world was not only the internet, but when Mr. Clinton became president and he won the election in 1992, so he became president in 1993, a man with a radio station and a radio program started going on and on about how we had to get rid of Mr. Clinton and had a tremendous agenda against Mr. Clinton. And that man's name was Rush Limbaugh. And Rush Limbaugh's radio program became very popular, but it wasn't necessarily balanced. It actually wasn't balanced, so we'll just be fair and say the truth. But it was biased, but there was also lack of truth in it. There were times when Mr. Limbaugh would say something and historically it wouldn't be true. But no one really caught it or took it away because the Fairness Doctrine was dead. Well, it wasn't too many years later, 1996, when Fox News was invented. Now, subsequent to that, MSNBC was invented, and if you watch MSNBC, you can see what the left thinks, and you can see what's wrong with Mr. Trump. If you watch Fox News, you can say, this is what's right with Mr. Trump and what the right perspective is. And I don't mean right correct, I mean conservative right position is. The problem is that there's a lot of people who don't watch both. And if you don't watch both, then how do you know? Because everyone knows. If this is Mr. Divorced and Mrs. Divorced, this is her story. This is his story. We all know that the truth is somewhere in here. The truth is not just there, and the truth is not just there. The right is not completely correct, meaning the conservative right, and the left is certainly not politically always correct. And why we cannot accept that truth, I don't know. But if you only watch one station, and there's no longer a fairness doctrine, and there's no longer fact checking, and there's no longer an obligation to be correct or honest or truthful. Holy cow. Which then asks the question, what are we becoming if we have only one story that affirms where you stand instead of informs where you might stand? And so I want to go to Russia for 5 seconds. Because when the communists came to power in Russia, they invented a newspaper called Pravda. And the word Pravda in Russian means truth. And there's, I think, a website called Truth Social. How far apart is that from Pravda? And was Pravda always honest? No. But do we really want to be Russia while they were communists and have Pravda be our news station? I don't. And one of the reasons I do these videos is to give you all information and give you perspective so that you can be balanced. So you have a wonderful day. Think about all of this. Look up some things. Look up Pravda. It'll blow your mind.